Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Colleen and Kyle Domenick, yes, members of the Midnight Society science team, have once again found their way into the darkness of the Fox Den for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy. Yet please excuse me, I must feast. Absolutely delicious, and thank you for allowing me to replenish my power sources. Without further ado, it is time for Colleen, Kyle, and myself to take a walk into the darkness known as the Dogman phenomenon.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, yes, once again, it is Midnight Lycanthropy time here on StarFox Radio. And again, we have the North American Dogman Project science team in the house. Yes, team, because we have two hosts and two of our scientists who, yes, have found their way through the Dogman and werewolf-infested forest to sit around the late-night fire and burn the timber as we once again open up the Midnight Society book. Colleen, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
Man, I'm doing just great. How are you doing?
I have been super busy, and it's excellent to sit down and chat with you. And Kyle, my guy, how are you, bro?
I'm doing wonderful. I hope you guys are doing well and staying warm this winter.
Yeah, it's been pretty, like you said, a little bit cold for sure, but it sounds like y'all have been having a little bit more cold than up here, which is ironic because Dirty Birdie was just saying his butt cheeks were freezing the other day.
Oh, I love Birdie.
Yes, he is a legend. And to the audience, you should know who he is as well because he is a bi-weekly host. Yet tonight, because I love to learn and you can't really argue with good science. Yes, we've spoken before about bad science, but we don't deal with bad science, only good science. We are going to allow Kyle and Colleen to pretty much run the show, but I always do like to nerd out. I was geeking out earlier and found out some pretty cool facts that I would like to tell both of my scientists and also the audience. And the first one that is just mind-boggling is the Greenland shark that they found is 400 years old. Wait a second, 400? Yes, and they believe this thing does not even hit sexual maturity till around its 150 year. Okay, that is some pretty gnarly stuff. And before I speak again, what do you both think of that?
I know nothing about sharks other than I'm terrified of them. Put me in the forest anytime. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm not much of an ocean goer, but I had heard of this before, and it's very, very interesting. They are a very deep water species, and it's crazy how little we know about our own planet. And yet we're sending machines and people to moons and planets far, far away.
Isn't that beautiful right there? I mean, I couldn't agree more because, yes, the ocean is so unexplored, and same thing with the caves, but yeah, we're just looking elsewhere. Well, these next two facts, but obviously we're going to deal with one at a time. Well, it comes to freezing. Okay, that's a little bit of a hint right here. And I don't know which one of these I find more baffling and beautiful. So I'm just going to throw a dart at the wall because I can't pick one that I'd find less appealing. We all know the woolly mammoth, correct, was arguably pushing 10,000, 13,000, 15,000. Yeah, you know how science rolls sometimes with that years ago. Well, recently, some really good science and scientists have found a pretty isolated island in Siberia where there is evidence that 347 years ago, there were still active mammoths. And recently, some of these people that are interested in collecting ivory to try to combat the illegal trade on elephants, they're dealing with mammoth ivory to create things and such, are claiming that they have had some that still had what seemed to be fresh blood on it. But obviously, if something's been thawed out for a bit, it's going to look fresh. And wow, right?
That is bizarre. I had not heard that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that either. That's really, really interesting. But same thing with the ocean. I guess we don't know our planet as good as we like to think we do.
For sure.
Right. And it's back to what we all say is everyone likes to kind of congest together for the most part in areas. We do still have some spots that are unexplored. And Siberia is, well, pretty vast. And this area is remote. You know, Kodiak Island's pretty remote. Obviously, it's more explored than this area. But wow, 347 years ago, it just really shows you sometimes how the time lapse is a little bit screwed. Like we've said before, Dinopithecus, cave hyena, short-faced cave bear. Oh, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000. All three of those, what are we just throwing? Dire wolves, too. What did we just decide to throw that number at the wall? And because we don't have a really quality answer, because that's pretty recent as well. When I hear things like that, obviously I do my fact checking. But at first I heard that on History Channel. Great. And then I went online and saw that PBS, BBC, and then some other lesser known broadcasters had been covering it. I'm like, all right, wow, this actually has some clout. This wasn't just something that was a one-way perspective saying this. And that's what I always encourage everyone to do. And this next one, what the heck? The wood frog. All right, this is so cool. Freezes solid as an ice cube for 7 months, no heartbeat or anything. And then it thaws out and chills and goes amongst its way until again it becomes frozen for 7 months. Tell me that is not so cool.
That is way cool, and I had heard about this. I've read about this one years ago, and because they're studying the effects of the freeze-thaw effect on different animals based on this frog. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I also had heard of this. This was really, really cool that it happens in nature and it feels so science fiction. And I wonder what we can figure out from this, because there's that like whole, do we go into cryo sleep to get to different galaxies and stuff? And is this our gateway to figuring that out? I don't know, but it's crazy. Just their biology is bonkers, and we still don't know everything about them. And they're one of the coolest little frogs, and hopefully your listeners know, but amphibians are going out due to climate change, whether it's human caused or not. But hopefully we can discover everything and still save these guys. But amphibians around the world are probably the most threatened subspecies of subset of animals, in the world.
Terrible stuff, because it's just so cool the things we can learn before we decide to, destroy things. And someone had to take it obviously to the extreme and be like, well, this means, obviously, what if we pull something from the permafrost and it's still alive? And I was like, whoa, okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit. 7 months is pretty lit, okay? But 11,000 years, that's a whole lot of being frozen. I mean, I know you can do that with flies and stuff. I mean, I figured that out not on purpose, but one time a fly got in our fridge, you pull it out, and then, I don't know, somehow you're like, wait a second, I threw that in the trash. And then my mom's like, yeah, thawed out. I'm like, what do you mean it thawed out? It was frozen. And she's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, that's so interesting. Bizarre stuff, like you both said. Yet I am going to throw you both the mic here because we have a pretty interesting couple topics to touch base on. And, well, yes, I'm a journalist and host. I am not a scientist. So I am going to step back and toss y'all the mic, my friends.
Well, thanks. And, so Kyle and I, all three of us kind of batted this topic around a little bit. And I thought it would be interesting to have this discussion because it's one of the questions that I'm most frequently asked. If these things exist, why don't we find a skeleton? And then I got to thinking about all of the times that I've spent either working in the woods or backpacking and hiking in the woods, and how infrequently I find skeletal remains of a critter, any kind of critter. I've found a few, but not a lot. You'd think there would be an abundance, right? And I know there's predation and things like that, but I wanted to kind of bounce this off Kyle in the biology realm of, what are the reasons that if the Dogman truly exists, why aren't we finding skeletons? And why aren't we finding skeletons of a lot of other things out there? I mean, you occasionally will see, I like in Yellowstone, I'll see occasionally maybe an elk rib cage or something like that, but not much. What are your thoughts, Kyle?
Yeah, you and I have a lot of the same background, Colleen. So at my time, also trotting through the forest, it was pretty rare on the crew to find bones, let alone finding like a whole rack of antlers with a skull attached. Like that stuff's really rare to find. You find it once in a while, and people bring home some really cool stuff, but by and large, it's very, very rare. And having worked in the field that I work in, I deal with on more than a few occasions. And I kind of thought about this question and decided to pick it out and pick it apart, kind of starting at recent all the way to when you just have bones left, and kind of go over a little bit of the processes as to what happens throughout. So I'll just dive right into that.
You bet.
So any animal, it can be an elk, it can be a dogman, it can be a rodent, it can be whatever you want. Say it in the woods somewhere. It is far away from human trails, so likely people aren't going to find it to begin with, but it's not out of the question. So the first thing that usually happens is whatever, if it is an act of predation, will consume it in its entirety, or in the case of like an elk or a larger prey animal, it will consume until full and then depart. A lot of predators do stash, so just because you found the it doesn't mean you're going to find the carcass itself. So bears will do this. They will drag it off to a safer area and cache it. Hyenas will do this. And animals will still find it because animals are full of wonderful senses. Vultures can smell for miles. Canines can smell for miles. Cats can track really well. Other bears can smell this. Whatever the case is, other animals will come to that carcass. And we usually think of these as scavengers. And scavengers, a lot of people, including myself for a long time, thought of vultures and insects and smaller animals that can't hunt the big game. But it's also important to remember that top predators will also pick off of carcasses. So in the winter time in North America, you will find bald eagles and golden eagles eating off of carcasses just because there's simply nothing to hunt anyway. So they're not going to starve just because there's nothing fresh. They're going to capitalize on whatever meal they can find. The more interesting case is also that it has been observed that herbivores will occasionally munch on carcasses. And this is thought to be usually used for trace minerals. So there are minerals inside of our bones and tissue that we store, obviously, because they're necessary to our functions as living beings, but they're not common out in the wild very often. And I wish I was so much more intelligent as far as insects go, but the insects use carcasses for a lot of cases. Starting with just flies, we all know that maggots grow out of stuff. So that is a vital part to their life cycle, is to feed and implant eggs on carcasses. There are lots of other insects that do this in different various parts of the carcass. Because there's a lot going on there. There's soft tissue, there's organs, there's the skin, there's the hair, there's, if it's a reptile, there's that hard, scaly skin, potentially a shell. There's so much going on inside of a carcass that isn't even just skin and bone. There's a lot going on there that a lot of animals use for a lot of different purposes, as well as, especially with herbivores, their last meals that they ate are usually already pre-digested, so animals that can't digest plant material super great suddenly have access to all of that as well in a lot of cases.
That's interesting, and thanks, Kyle. And so when and this explains a lot about why we're not finding carcasses. And one of the reasons why I was thinking about this was that interesting photo that I shared with both of you that was taken on a local trail, allegedly, about 3 months ago, 2 months ago, of an animal that we can't really wrap our head around what it is. It looks canine, it looks cat, it doesn't really fit in a mold. And I thought, well, how interesting was that, first of all, that a trail runner found this animal, probably due to smell, but still, they were up running the trail. And how often does that occur? Because I just haven't seen that many skeletal remains out in the woods. And the
Yeah,
thought that animals are also consuming bones is pretty interesting. I would think fresh marrow would be something that animals would need.
yeah, I remember that picture, and that was I showed so many people that picture, and no one could tell me definitively yes or no one way or the other. It looked really canine in origin, and that's about all I can say about it. But that kind of segues into the other part of, well, now you're all dried out. You're no longer a fresh carcass. What happens to the rest of that stuff? Because you like fur, you have a lot of bones left over. You usually have dried out skin and little chunks of meat left over that someone didn't pick off or couldn't pick off. And that kind of a very interesting phase as well. So bits of flesh and fur are great nesting material for birds. So we think of carcasses as being used a lot for food, but there's so many other uses for everything. So birds and small rodents will use that fur to make nests with and insulate themselves, either through going underground or building on top of trees and stuff. And insects will continue to feed and work on those bones and other tissues that are left over. Insects are one of the best biodegraders out there. I think only topped by fungi and other plants, because plants and fungi will be working on this entirely as well. There's a whole realm of microbes that is also going on through the entire decomposition process that I don't fully understand. Microbiology wasn't my strong suit, but there's also that going on. So keep in mind as I'm talking about that, this is a constant process. This is constantly breaking down. Bones are not impervious. Bones will eventually go back to the earth, like we all will. But that leads us to the bones. Where are the bones? Why haven't we found teeth? Why haven't we found a leg bone? Why haven't we found any of this stuff? Bones are incredibly important for a lot of animals. So the famous one is that hyenas will eat bones. They can process that. They can crunch into that. They are animals that are uniquely adapted to eating bones, should they need to. Canines can also eat bones, smaller bones, to get at that dried out marrow, because it might not seem appetizing to us, but there is calcium in there, and calcium is one of those other rare minerals that a lot of animals don't naturally have a lot of access to. So birds and rodents will again use bones for nesting materials, but rodents will also use bones for getting at that calcium. They will chew away, degrade that. You'll see a lot of that, especially in our area, on antlers. You'll see a little nibble marks here and there, and a lot of people think they're scuff marks, but if you look close enough, a porcupine's been chewing on that, or a marmot's been chewing on that, or a squirrel. So that's really important, and especially for rodents, they need to dull down their teeth. They continue to grow and grow and grow. In captive settings, we have to trim their teeth a lot of the times, which sounds very invasive. It's not nearly as glamorous as you think it could be. But in the wild, they have to wear down those teeth somehow, and chewing on bones, they're very hard, and they do provide a benefit at the end of it. So it's kind of a no-brainer for rodents. Additionally, there have been some cases of other prey animals, such as hoofstock, breaking into bones, chewing on them, but they're not going to get nearly as much out of it as the other things I've already discussed. Additionally, if there's a good, healthy soil mixture, there are natural acids in the soil that will eventually start to break down bones. So that's why when you bury your pet, it breaks down. You're not going to find anything after a year or two. And I tried my best to nail down a good timeline on how long it takes for something to decompose from death to nothing at all. And there's not really a solid answer because it A, depends on the size of the carcass, and B, there's this other factor that has nothing to do with life at all, and that's the weather. Weather can make decomposition accelerate, decelerate. If it's a very hot, arid environment, it can increase the desiccation process, which is to dry out. That is what desiccation means. Which can accelerate the process up to that bony stage and then slow it down. So it's very interesting what weather can do, as well as weather can wash away bones and bury them. Or if an animal died in a rock slide, we're probably not going to find too much anyways, because it could be crushed and buried underneath stuff. So there's so many factors as to why we don't find things. On top of the sheer, like you were saying earlier with the last thing that you showed me, was just the sheer improbability of finding it to begin with. Because we're all hikers, we're all looking up, we're all looking out. We're not usually looking down. There's a few of us snake and insect nerds and plant nerds that'll look down once in a while, but we're not looking for bones necessarily.
Yeah, good information. And that helps a lot because I'm looking at things from a contaminant standpoint. I'm not looking at things from the biological standpoint, really. And because that's not my specialty like it is yours. So that helps a lot. And you touched on the soil. The acidity of the soil has a lot to do with decomposition. And all across the United States, our soil is vastly changes. So it whether or not something's and like you touched on weather, so whether or not something's going through decomp fast or slow, that is definitely atmospheric and the soil qualities, snowpack, like water, the whole 9 yards. It's going to play a factor in that, which is why they have we have what we call body farms, right? You guys have heard of those, where they do CSI type studies on bodies, and one of them's in Tennessee because Tennessee's very humid, and so it lends itself to decomp pretty quickly, I believe. So they do studies there for crime scenes, which is only, I think we have 3 or 4 body farms in the U.S. So you can kind of extrapolate some of that data to animal without predation, right?
Yeah, there's truly just so much going on with what happens with a body when it dies. It's crazy how much really occurs. And this, like I said before, I'm not an expert in the acids in the soil. I'm super interested in if you know a lot about that. But I'm not a microbiologist either. There's tons of processes going on with just the micro level too to break down and recycle all of those nutrients back into the system.
Definitely a science that escapes me. I'm not on the micro level at all, unless it's a contaminant. Thank
Yeah,
you for doing that research, Kyle. That really helps me put some things in perspective as well. I hadn't thought about some of the things you talked about, um, and it does help. I was a huge skeptic to begin with Bigfoot, like forever, until I thought about it almost on the paranormal aspect. Maybe is something like going through portals. I don't know, right? I don't know, and that helps me because I came from the science, well, the aspect of why aren't we finding scat? Why aren't we finding bones or hair or something? And this does help answer that question. Although I do find bear scat when I'm out hiking. I do find coyote scat, things like that. So that I'm always going back to how come I'm not finding Dogman or Bigfoot? I mean, what is it? Why aren't we finding this?
yeah, it's a big question as to why we're not finding anything. And the awful truth might be is that it's been found and someone just doesn't know they found it. That's the other thing that I thought of while I was doing this research is if I'm just running on a trail and I don't necessarily know what bone feels like. If you felt bone before, you can pick something up and you'll know if it's bone or not. But if you haven't felt that before, you could pick something up and go, wow, this is kind of a cool rock. Or maybe you do know it's bone, but you're not that impressed with it. But you're going to take it home and show it to your kids anyway. Like evidence can be floating around that has DNA qualities to it, but just because it's insignificant in someone's eyes or it has been biodegraded down so much that it's indistinguishable to be of any value, I thought about that, and that's the big thing about biology is suddenly people are now out in the wild too.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about something like that. Yeah, absolutely. Because if we don't have, and this question came up on another Facebook group or page or something like that. If we were to find one, do we, right? And that's always the conundrum of these things. Is like you find something but how else? If you don't have a body, how else do you study it? And in your opinion, I mean, how many animals would you need to have a viable population?
Yeah, that entirely depends upon the animal itself. There are populations that limp along at 15 to 20, and then there's populations that require thousands to succeed. So it entirely depends upon an animal that at the end of the day, we can only speculate about. We can make very good scientific theories about what it might do and what it might need and what it might consume, what it might look like. But at the end of the day, we don't know. It could be like going back to the thing where we might have the evidence. How do we know we have the evidence if we don't know what the evidence looks like also at the end of the day?
Mm-hmm. Good thoughts.
Yeah, that's excellent stuff right there. And I mean, I was going to touch base on a few things, but of course, the scientists, well, are ahead of me. I mean, why wouldn't you be, correct? There are, well, I went old school here in Feral. I wrote down some things while you were both speaking so that I was able to get my train of thought. I do know that cats and other predators bury their poop. I mean, even with like a feral cat outside, you can see. I feel like potentially that might have something to do with a little bit of why there isn't, say like a big dumping site like a gorilla does. I was watching Nat Geo the other day and they're in their little den that they've made and they're just dropping these huge turds. You're like, dude, what the Christmas trees? All right now. Yeah, and that's like right in the open, but then you see, like I said, a cat, trying to be pretty discreet about it. On a humorous note, this is just gross because I've seen some survival people that have done it. Caribou stomach salad. Like, Kyle was saying where certain animals can't digest that. I would have to. I don't even know. Someone would have to like force me and be like, "Oh, Star Fox, you're not gonna make it anymore," and I couldn't respond. They would just shove it in my face or something. I just
Oh
could
no,
not ever
no.
do that right there. But it's funny. And then one of the other things too was like Kyle has said, anything that's large is going to be nearly impossible to completely fossilize. It's usually something that is small and a lot of times ocean dwelling that we get the complete fossils. I mean, dinosaurs, for example, are very minimal as to what we've been able to find. I mean, a couple times recently they found, like, I believe it was almost half of an ankylosaurus, but that was an extremely rare and almost perfect condition for it to have occurred in the mud. And also, like you were saying about the bones, yeah, my squirrel loves chicken bones. She goes gnarly on those. And actually, the other day, I humorously enough, because she needed to eat other things, I took away the bone because she needed to eat other stuff. And she got so pissed and was just screaming at me. But they do enjoy that stuff for sure. And also, too, again, I believe every animal is a scavenger because a lot of people also don't realize that hyenas, yeah, subdivisions are, but the spotted hyena is a hunter, okay? It actually hunts the majority of its food, but again, will scavenge things. But it actually owns Africa. Everyone likes to give the crown to the lions. The spotted hyenas have like a 90% success ratio. They've been seen in packs that were above 100. Okay, think how many game animals you can pull down in a attack ambush when you have like 110 hyenas going crazy. You're gonna take down like what? At least maybe three, four, five, six, maybe seven zebra if you're lucky. Because I mean, that's a pretty massive amount. And hyenas don't really have a problem with just like continuously going after you because they don't really burst out necessarily. They're more of kind of like a consistent speed, but they're not related to felines or canines, so they don't really have the holdbacks. Whereas usually canines that are built for that are leaner, like wolves and things, and coyotes can kind of do that too. But felines need to keep their energy, meaning, yeah, tigers are so gnarly, but they're not going to sit there and be able to just expel all this explosive energy, which is why they're usually docile the majority of the day. But hyenas don't have to deal with either of that. Pretty interesting right there as well. And another thing about with the bodies not being found, I have a couple reasonings on that. And the first one I just wanted to say real quick is I believe that they live in and use the caves and also live in burrows. They're going to go back to what they're comfortable with if they're, say, mortally wounded, I feel like, meaning any animal that is wounded goes back to safety or what it feels comfortable with. I mean, you could have a house cat your whole life and love it and it loves you, but then it goes outside one day and chooses to go somewhere else to have its final moments instead of around you. It goes and hides somewhere. Yeah, I mean, again, too, things are going to be decomposing pretty quick, but as you both were talking, I pulled up some really cool stuff too of animals and insects that actually bury their deceased. And Kyle touched on a few of them. But yeah, you have ants, termites, bees, elephants as well have been seen burying their deceased while digging holes and moving dirt over with the trunks. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and other large primates basically wrapping them up in like bamboo and things and more or less like a coffin. And even some species of dogs have been seen digging holes and then, or I should say canines, and then putting their deceased in there and then covering the hole up. Laboratory rats and other rodents, dolphins, and other orcas. Interesting stuff.
That is. I didn't know that was such an extensive list. I've actually watched magpies, for lack of a better term, have funerals for each other. Like they gather around a fallen comrade, and it's the strangest thing I've ever seen. But they circle around them, and if they have the ability to carry them off, I think they would. So animals are fascinating. So yeah, I mean, I think they're probably using the cave system, but still not all of them are going to die in their cave. But
Hmm.
maybe the other population brings them back, drags
Yeah,
them back.
the animal kingdom is so crazy about what they can and can't do and what they will and won't do. It
Mhm.
also with like dens and stuff, those will collapse. And sure, we know that there was a den there, but how many people are going to go dig that out? We as a species are very uninterested in having to go the extra mile a lot of the time to get to the bottom of a question that may or may not have an answer to it. Which is why it's so good to work with a group like you guys. Is it's constantly it's a little pushes here and there, but it's just a constant carrying on. But if you're going to go out in the wilderness and you're like, oh, that used to be a wolf den, that'd be really cool, but it's all collapsed in. I'm not going to spend the next 4 hours by myself digging it out with my hands and feet, and maybe I brought a shovel. But like, I'm out there walking my dog on a hike, or I'm going out and I'm enjoying what's alive, not necessarily what. So there's a lot of that missed opportunity that may or may not be happening in the world. And then we've discussed this before. There's so many caves we don't know about. It's like the ocean. There's so much square footage on this planet that we just don't know about. That there could just be the holy grail of fossils or skeletons just resting there.
For sure. I mean, look how many bones we do recover every year. I mean, in the mining district out here, they found two mastodons not far from my house at a mine that's now shut down, but they found they weren't entirely whole, but they were side by side. And we do find a lot of skeletal stuff in mining districts because they're the ones digging. And like you said, Kyle, I'm not digging, you're not digging, but they're digging. So um, there's quite a lot of stuff that is recovered. And who knows what we're going to find one day if we end up into these cave systems. I mean, Lord knows we have horror movies about cave systems. And what's down there. We really don't know. We really don't know.
Yeah, and I imagine from a mining standpoint and a risk management standpoint, if you find those caves, do you even say anything about it? Is that worth the danger to your workers and your bottom line? Do you worry about that? You're not. I don't know if you have to report that. I know it's highly recommended and probably required by law if you find a mastodon skeleton in your dig site to probably report that. But if you find an underground cave system, do you need to report that? And if not, why would you? Um, there's a lot of that I don't know how much is true, but I can see that becoming an issue in some instances.
Well, and just this brings up something that just occurred to me. Like, okay, in Idaho alone, I think we have something like, um, over 100,000 historic adits. I want to say, on public land. And an adit is an entrance to an underground mine, right? That goes horizontally into, that's your entrance and exit out of a mine, where a shaft is a vent, that's a vertical vent, right? So think about if they exist, and we have coal mines all over the East, we have gold mines and silver mines and all kinds of mining out here in the Western United States. All of these features, these mine features that have never been closed, and we're trying to close them. And the only thing that we really look for when we're closing some of these mines is we do look to see, are animal trails coming in and out of them? Are they in use? And what they do is they then they do bat surveys, because if it's being used by a bat population, they will grate the entrance to allow the bats to come and go, but they want to try to keep humans safe, right? So they grate the entrance, or now we use stuff like spray foam and we puff them closed. So if these animals have found these old caves that were old mines that are not flooded naturally, then they not only do they have the natural underground features that are out there, but they have literally probably 1 million or more mine features out there to use, when Idaho has probably 100,000 or more. Nevada's full of them. Montana's full of them. So, I mean, you have all of these states with all of these now historic mines.
Yeah, and that's something else that you're entirely right. Like, just because we're not using it doesn't mean it's going to waste necessarily. And is there stuff that we're burying in there because there's no people in there, but we're saving it for bats, or we don't see anything in there, and there may be a dogman or some other living animal in there, but too little, too late kind of deal. We've collapsed the tunnel. There's a lot of that could be happening, and it's I can also imagine that there are millions of mine sites that we don't know about that are historical and have been there forever and have been abandoned and forgotten, that we may never get to closing.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we only know what we know, right? So if we have an old patent or a claim, or we've stumbled upon this site and it's on what we call public land, right, which is either like Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service or state land or something like that, then we document it, and we start working on a closure plan based on its propensity of exposure to humans, right? So, like, we just found out over, I think there's a little town out here called, is it Idaho City? It's out west of us, Kyle, and by Boise, I think. And they found a shaft right behind a church that is used every Sunday. And all they did was put a piece of barbed wire around the shaft to try to keep people out. Well, kids, I mean, if anything get through the barbed wire, particularly children, and fall several hundred feet down a shaft. So that one is another one. They finally got that one closed, but that's just an example of, this one was right there for humans to fall into, let alone anything else. And how many do we not know about that are now pretty much covered by forest?
Yeah, that's crazy to think that that's probably been there for 100 years. Just
Right.
sitting, waiting for people, waiting to swallow up whatever wanders in.
Mhm.
And in those cases, you don't care what animal lives there. You block it up because it's in the middle of a town. And
Right.
you're exactly right. There's just so much dense forest that we still have in deep wilderness, even just in the continental United States, but all over North America and the rest of the world, that we just can't really get to easily. That could be covering up old mine shafts from a time when it wasn't covered in dense forest.
Mhm.
And how much of that is now underwater, and how much of that is now entirely reshaped through other geological events. There's truly, like you said, we only know what we know.
Yeah, so if they're using these systems, we may never see them, except for these really occasional encounters that people have that they're reporting. Because there's just seems to be endless possibilities for creatures to hide if they really wanted to hide.
Yep. Isn't that the truth right there? Great stuff by both of you as always. And I learned a pretty gnarly, I wouldn't want to say fact yet because, again, it's kind of hearsay, but there's been numerous miners and things that have reported hearing strange vocalizations and seeing strange shadows and such down in the caves. And May Koo, who is part of our science team and our spelunker, and she is a paleontologist expert as well, was saying that only 10% of the caves touch back to the surface. That's pretty scary right there in that aspect. And she has also said that in some of the spots in there, the environment hasn't changed, and that you can just look at something that was the way it looked like thousands of years ago. Meaning there could be a bear claw in this like really soft kind of clay from so long ago. She showed me awesome images before, but you could just sit there and claw your own hand into it because it's still the same type of atmosphere. That's just really why I always wondered and questioned why there would be reasonings for especially the dire wolf, the cave hyenas, the Dinopithecus, and the short-faced cave bear to have gone extinct because they don't have any really known predators. And I'm just going to use the short-faced cave bear for an example. It's a much better version of the grizzly bear, meaning if it had to deal with larger predators such as plain lions, humans, and take down larger prey, it's not going to have any sort of issue taking down moose and caribou now. And then people are going to be like, all right, well, yes, it would overheat more, though, and the climate's changed in certain areas. Correct. But it spent 90 to maybe a little bit less of its time in the cave systems. So that's not going to affect that. Meaning, like I just previously stated, it's still the same type of atmosphere in there. If it just goes out, gets its food, and goes back to its cave, it's not really going to be affected by that. And we don't like caves, and we don't go into caves really. And same thing with cave hyenas. Again, dealt with other crazy things and would have no reason, again, dealing with anything that's around now. And people don't realize, I believe it was you, Colleen, that first stated that, how hardy a hyena is, okay? Again, no reason for that to have gone extinct. And dire wolves is an interesting one because people don't realize they are actually related to jackals. And that one I'm interested in still for sure, but I can see a little bit more why, because gray wolves and modern day canines were really busting in on their turf and their food sources, and also the large plain lion that recently was discovered came in, and they had a lot of competition, and they were out in the plains. That, those areas really changed in the climate. If people want to kind of, throw a little bit of dirt on that one, that's okay. But again, now with the Dinopithecus, where it was located in Africa and also liked to, especially specifically South Africa, and it enjoyed caves as well, the climate hasn't changed that much there either. Why would any of those apex predators go extinct? Because we know humans did what they could to avoid them. And again, like I just stated, what would really have caused them to go extinct? We're only, again, talking 10,000, 11,000 years ago.
Yeah, the only thing that comes to my mind is a drastic change in weather patterns causing extinction. I can't imagine what else it would be. It's an atmospheric condition, right? So it's either um, floods or famine or drought, or, I mean, that's the only reason why I can think of that they would not be here right now.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Colleen's line of thinking that there had to have been something that occurred non-biological to affect a large subset of animal populations that would cause a cascade of some sort to affect these large predators. Because if they lose access to adequate amounts of a food source, that they are uniquely designed, they're just such a specialist that once animal A, animal B will follow because they can't branch out. If that's the case with some of these extinct species, then that could have happened. Or if there just simply wasn't enough food to go around to sustain high populations. And as smaller animals came up through the genetic trees and evolution, if those were just the ones that were successful at the end of the day and outcompeted because they didn't need as much food for some other reason that we don't know about, because we can only make guesses about what the cave bear and the cave hyena and the plains lion were good at, what their niche was, what they were specifically evolved to exploit. We just don't know.
Great stuff right there. No, for sure. And again, I'm not a scientist. I just try to really think about it. And I do know that you recently had the thing that's awful taxidermy, but like the ring docus, that looks to be something sort of hyena-ish, but the people that did it obviously weren't too smart. So even if it's terrible taxidermy, they put chemicals all over it. No way DNA is ever going to get taken because that's not what they were thinking about. They were trying to stuff it. Nice, great. But then also you do have the case that there's a couple different standing points as we start to come to an end here, where supposedly this hunter unalived a short-faced cave bear, and I believe the Smithsonian has the skull, but there's people that have looked at it and said it was just a grizzly bear skull and it was actually smaller than described. But then I've recently been told that the Smithsonian, even though it does show great things, if it only has one of something, it never brings it up to the main floor in case of anything occurring to it. So if they were to have only that one actual short-faced cave bear skull in hand, they wouldn't bring it up to the main floor. They would obviously bring up the grizzly bear skulls that they had numerous ones amount. Do you know which bear encounter I'm referring about?
Is this the encounter in Canada or no? No. No, I don't think I do.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that encounter.
Really? Okay. Well, before we do tie this up, I would like to definitely get the correct information for you. But out of all the animals I did mention, what was it that you would think would have the highest probability to still be kicking around as I try to find this bear story for you? Meaning, out of the Dinopithecus, which is that enormous baboon that was a nightmare, and then the short-faced cave bear, dire wolves, and cave hyenas. Out of all of those, you can pick more than one, but pretty much, I guess I would like to hear both sides from both of you. Which ones would have a chance, and which ones you're just like, no, I can't see that happening.
I've thought about this since I met you, and the ones that I keep kicking around would be the hyena and the dire wolf. Those are the two that I would hang my hat on, only because they seem more adaptable with larger ranges in my head. What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, I have a hard time with it because that question, the obvious answer for me is, well, none of them. But if any of them were going to, I would have to agree with the cave hyena. That feels like such an interesting niche to fill that not a lot of apex predators do these days. And hyenas are just so adaptable. Even just the species that we know, they're very good at generalizing. They're very good at what they do. They're very efficient predators. I have to imagine that their ancestors were similar.
Yeah, again, that all makes excellent sense right there for sure. Because obviously, well, supposedly it isn't kicking around anymore. But again, like we did all speak about, well, the odds are we still don't know everything about what it is that is happening around us, especially with how much forest is still out there. And I mean, this isn't huge, but recently they found a 6-foot snake. Nope, time out. It actually ended up being a limbless lizard up in a mountainous region somewhere over, I believe, in like the Middle East. So, sure, 6 feet isn't huge, but I mean, that's still pretty large. I do think there's always a probability that there are larger things that we haven't documented. On land, it's obviously a little bit harder, but in the ocean, for sure. And as we start to tie this up, is there anything else both of you beautiful minds would like to touch base on?
No, I mean I thought this was a great discussion, and Kyle, always you always bring it to the table and make me think a little bit about some of some of my preconceived notions maybe that I've had. You helped me kind of move through those a little bit tonight, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I thought this was a really, really cool discussion. It's, for me as a biologist, it's a very interesting topic to begin with, to dive into and really verify facts and remember stuff and apply it to stuff that I see every day. But just getting to learn additionally about the latter half of the conversation, I had no idea that we're still finding gigantic holes in the ground just outside of towns, and about just all the stuff that we've built as people that is still great habitat for other animals that will come in behind us.
Beautiful stuff right there for sure. And I appreciate both of you sitting down with us and hanging out, because I do get a chance to speak to both of you, but I do not get a chance to get you to be on the podcast together. But in general, it is totally amazing stuff for sure. And I will make sure to try and find that article for you. It was on the Proof is Out There, but I will try to show it to you. Again, it's been supposedly debunked as not a short-faced cave bear, but the person that shot it back in, it was a while ago, claimed it was. It was enormous, supposedly. But yeah, I'm going to try to find that for you. And to the audience, yes, we do need to let these beautiful minds go back and do other amazing things that they must. This will be the conclusion for the meeting of the Midnight Society. But no worries, everyone's links will be up in the description of the video, so make sure to go over and check out their content. They are trying to do the same that we are here on Midnight Lycanthropy, which is getting out great information. And the Nightmare Roadshow covers a broad horizon of topics that I do not here cover, whereas we know we focus on missing people and strange animal behaviors. But if you do have an interest in many other things, do go over there and please check out their podcast, and we will have them back on soon. And if you enjoy their great knowledge, check out the playlist. Again, they're both set up to have their own Colleen and Kyle's playlist, and also they're under the science team. So thank you both for hanging out with me tonight. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much, StarFox.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always an honor.
You legends, you, I do adore every single one of you, and thank you for stopping in tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, and feed the algorithm. I will catch you very soon.